Dispatch considerations.
Let us consider the dispatch requirements for ETOPS. Each airline's minimum equipment list, or MEL, must specifically identify ETOPS unique dispatch items. The FAA Master MEL identifies ETOPS restrictions with either a diversion time limit or by using the abbreviation ER. For example, Item 24-21-01 of the 777 Master MEL lists ETOPS requirements for an inoperative APU-driven generator based on a diversion time limit. By comparison, the 767 Master MEL lists ETOPS requirements for the APU generator using an ER notation. ETOPS capability under MEL dispatch can vary by airplane model based on system redundancy considerations, as shown here for our APU generator example. ETOPS MEL items are not always this obvious. Consider the air-driven pump on the 767. This item may be inoperative, provided the hydraulic motor generator, or HMG, is not required. The HMG is required for ETOPS if one of the other three sources of AC power is inoperative. Therefore, if an engine-driven generator or the APU generator is inoperative, the HMG is required for ETOPS. If the HMG is required for dispatch, the air-driven pump must be operating normally. Each airline is responsible for identifying all possible ETOPS dispatch requirements in their own MEL. For ETOPS greater than 180 minutes on a two-engine airplane, certain additional systems must be operative at dispatch. These systems include the Fuel Quantity Indicating System, the APU electrical and pneumatic functions, the Auto Throttle System, and a second long-range communication system, such as SATCOM. One engine inoperative auto-land capability is also required if flight planning is based on its use. For airplanes with more than two engines, the Fuel Quantity Indicating System and a second long-range communication system are required for ETOPS. Flight plans should contain additional information for ETOPS, including the diversion time authority under which the flight was dispatched. The ETOPS entry point for a two-engine airplane is the first point on the route that is greater than 1 hour still air flying time from an adequate airport at the approved one-engine inoperative speed. For our flight, this occurs at the highlighted point. The flight plan should also identify the ETOPS equal time points, or ETPs. The ETPs are the points on the intended route where the diversion time from the two closest ETOPS alternates is the same. The ETP locations are typically listed on the flight plan by latitude and longitude, or by distance from a waypoint along the intended track. These ETP locations can be entered into the FMC as additional waypoints to assist in position monitoring. To legally dispatch an ETOPS flight, the forecast weather at the planned ETOPS alternates must meet ETOPS requirements from the earliest possible arrival time until the latest possible arrival time. The earliest possible arrival time assumes the diversion occurs at the first equal time point for the airport. The latest possible arrival time assumes a diversion from the second equal time point for the airport. The flight plan should list the designated ETOPS alternate airports and the earliest to latest possible arrival times for each airport. The final ETOPS dispatch requirement is the critical fuel scenario. This requirement ensures that in the event of a diversion, there will be sufficient fuel available to fly to an ETOPS alternate airport. The critical fuel scenario considers a pressurization failure, an engine failure, and a combined pressurization and engine failure at the most fuel-critical equal time point. The normal scheduled fuel load at this critical point is compared to the most limiting critical fuel condition and increased if needed to meet ETOPS requirements. The critical fuel diversion profile for the two pressurization failure cases assumes an emergency descent to 10,000 feet and a subsequent cruise to the ETOPS alternate. The depressurized cruise segment is flown at long-range cruise speed with all engines operating and at the approved ETOPS planning speed with one engine inoperative. For the engine failure case, the critical fuel diversion profile assumes an MCT drift down at the ETOPS planning speed followed by cruise to the ETOPS alternate at thrust-limited altitude. At the alternate, critical fuel planning ensures sufficient fuel for descent to 1,500 feet and 15 minutes holding, followed by a normal approach and landing. The critical fuel scenario must account for forecast winds and temperatures, possible icing conditions, and airplane performance deterioration. An adjustment for APU fuel burn is also included if the APU is a required power source. Potential wind forecast errors are accounted for by adjusting the predicted wind magnitude by 5%. Or alternatively, by increasing the total critical fuel required by an additional 5% if the airline is not using an FAA-accepted wind forecast model. Icing fuel protection is the greater of airframe ice drag plus thermal anti-ice fuel for 10% of the forecast icing exposure time. Or thermal anti-ice fuel only for the entire time during which icing is forecast. The performance deterioration allowance is normally taken from the airline's airplane performance monitoring program. If the airline does not track airplane deterioration, a conservative 5% fuel allowance must be used. For ETOPS greater than 180 minutes, time-limited systems planning is an additional consideration that may affect ETOPS dispatch. This requirement ensures that the diversion time to an ETOPS alternate under forecast winds and temperatures is within the airplane's most time-limited ETOPS significant system capability. The diversion time at all-engine cruise speed may not exceed the airplane's most limiting fire suppression system time minus 15 minutes. Typically, the cargo fire suppression system defines this time limit. In addition, the diversion time at one engine inoperative speed may not exceed the airplane's other most limiting ETOPS significant system time minus 15 minutes. ETOPS time limited system capability is provided in the FAA-approved ETOPS Configuration, Maintenance, and Procedures Document, or CMP. If forecast wind and temperature conditions result in an ETP diversion time that exceeds time-limited system requirements, the routing solution and/or ETOPS alternate selection will need to be adjusted.